Chapter 10. Wheatland is the largest city in the whole wide world. Maybe so, but it couldn't have been much bigger than Rutland. Early that morning, Mama got me up. She packed my food basket so full you'd think that nobody in Vermont had ate for a week, and this was it. Papa had gone to the barn to yoke Solomon to drive me to the Tanner place, and when Mama wasn't looking, Aunt Carrie slipped me the 10 cents. She had it all knotted up in a clean white hanky, and she wadded it so deep in my hip pocket she halfway pushed my trousers down. "Don't lose it," she whispered to my ear. Lose it? After all that wrapping, I'd be hoped to ever find it. "It's for a ride in the merry-go-round," she said, "and if you don't want to spend it, you can squirrel it away." To make short of it, I got breakfasted and basketed and packed off to Tanner's. I never thought we'd get that far. Seems as though Solomon weren't near as hurried to see Rutland as I was. Maybe he already knew he wasn't going. "Papa," I said, "tell me about Rutland." "I never been." Neither had I, so there really wasn't much point in talking about it. A day or two ago, Papa as much as said to Mama that if he heard the word Rutland 3 more times, they was going to have to send him to Brattleboro. That's where the crazies go. I guess when they go crazy. When I jumped out of the ox cart and Papa was turning Solomon for home, all he said to me was one word: manners. It sure wasn't far to Rutland, not the way those dapple gray horses of Mr. Tanner's moved that rig. They must have been barned all summer at the speed they trotted. Ben Tanner drove, and I sat between him and his wife. Tight, close. But it was all Mrs. Tanner and I could do just to hold tight. "Hang on, Bess," said Mr. Tanner, and we were off. His grays were called Quaker Lady and Quaker Gent. Other than the fact that one was a mare and the other a gelding, you couldn't tell them apart. Except from the driver's seat, when their tails were up. Boy, could they trot. We passed so many other rigs on the way to Rutland, I lost count. They sure were a pair, and Mr. Tanner was as proud of that brace of grays as he was of Bob and Bib. He just cottoned to things in twos. I was about to ask him why he didn't keep a second Mrs. Tanner around somewhere, just as a matched pair to take out on Sunday, or why he didn't just wed twins. But I remembered manners and owed up to silence. "Never miss a chance," Papa had once said, "to keep your mouth shut." And the more I studied on it, the sounder it grew. We got to Rutland the same time everybody else did. There couldn't have been nobody in Vermont who weren't there, and all dressed for Sabbath. It was some sight to see, even before we got to the fairgrounds. It reminded me of the story I heard about a man from Learning who had gone all the way to the city of New York. When he got back, folks all asked him what the city was like. All he said was, "There was so much going on at the depot, I never got to the village." I didn't know where the Rutland depot was, but it seemed to be about everywhere, and when we pulled up at the fairgrounds, I was feared to blink for missing some of it. The first place we headed for was where the stock was bedded down. Mrs. Tanner and I looked for what she called a rest room. As it was still morning early, I wasn't of a mind to rest, but Mrs. Tanner sure was in a hurry. Was where the stock was bedded down. Mrs. Tanner and I looked for what she called a rest room. As it was still morning early, I wasn't of a mind to rest, but Mrs. Tanner sure was in a hurry for it. Bess was a big woman, and I never suspected she could cover so much distance in so short a time. We never did get to rest. All we did was find a pair of shanties, one marked ladies and the other one gents. I knew right off it had something to do with where Mr. Tanner was going to put up his team. Even had their names on the door, and I thought that was real fancy. I sort of looked around for a shanty that said Pinky on the door, as they sure did things up fine in Rutland. But it seemed like Bess Tanner was still in a big hurry to rest. She mumbled something about riding that fast over those cussed bumps and what it did to her insides. Must have been the reason she was tired. Just before she pushed me through the gents' door, she whispered a word of warning about the place. "Don't speak to a soul in there, you hear? Place like that are full of perverts." There wasn't much to do inside except take a leak, which I did. I looked around to see if I could spot me a pervert. As I was the only one in the place, there was no one to ask. I'd overheard Aunt Mattie say pervert to Mama and Aunt Carrie when they were talking, so I just figured that a pervert had something to do with grammar. Or maybe it was something like a cornet. But if there was a pervert in the place, they sure kept it hid. I sure hoped I'd see me one or two before we left Rutland, seeing as both Bess Tanner and Aunt Matter were so keen on them. Mr. Tanner was outside waiting for us, and the next thing we did was go see Bob and Bib. The best part was that Pinky was close by, only one shed away. I jumped into her pen and put my arms around her neck and hugged her tight. "Pinky," I said, "we're at Rutland. Ain't it grand?" Right away quick we got Bob and Bib yoked and bowed. Bob was always left and Bib right. We went across an open show area where some men were exercising some big horses with hairy hoofs to find a photographer. We spent the better part of an hour getting our picture took. The man who owned the camera got up under a big black tent. His wife held a funny-looking gewgaw up in the air. It looked like some sort of snow shovel to me, but it was the first snow shovel I ever see explode. You never saw such a bang of light on a cloudy day in your life. I never saw the World War, but it sure must have been like that. I almost jumped out of my boots. Bob and Bib didn't take kindly to it either. They backed into me and started fighting the yoke. I tried to still them, but I couldn't see. When the snow shovel went off, I was looking right at it, and it was the last thing I saw for quite a spell. It was a tribulation to me, too, because we come to Rutland Fair to see a lot more than a damn fool snow shovel go off. It come time to show the oxen. You should have seen 'em, big as August 1st. Mr. Tanner nodded to a yoke of Herefords and said they'd weigh up about a ton each. "Will Bob and Bib get that big?" I asked. "Bigger, on account that Bob and Bib are Holstein, and they're the biggest and best." I sure was proud to hear that, even prouder when we went to the ox pull. When there was a pause in the contest, the man, who was talking through a big thing on his mouth that made his voice louder, called out Mr. Tanner's name. "Exhibition only, and not for sale. From the town of Learning, a perfect yoke of matched yearlings by name of Bob and Bib, owned by Mr. Benjamin Franklin Tanner, and worked in the ring by Mr. Robert Peck." That was my cue to take Bob and Bib around the ring 3 times and then out. But I couldn't move, until Mr. Tanner gave me a healthy prod in the backside with his goad and said, "Git." There I be, me, at Rutland Fair, marching around a big sawdust ring with all the people clapping their hands and pointing at Bob and Bib. It made my heart pound so hard I felt I was going to pump out right there in that ring. I was wishing that Mama and Papa and Aunt Carrie could see. Pinky, too. It was sinful, but I wanted the whole town of Learning to see me just this once. If only Edward Thatcher could see, and Jacob Henry, and Becky Tate. Parading my oxen around the ring and listening to the people clapping made me squint my eyes up tight. I could see all the folks I knew sitting there in those big circles of seats. Manners, I said to myself, and walked real tall. It was just like I was somebody. A man leaned over the fence and said to me, "What's their line, boy?" "Out of Apron, Mr. Tanner's prize milker," I said. "The sire bull was his, too." "Beowulf?" "Yes, sir." After 3 times round the ring, I touched Bib lightly on his right ear with my wand. The 2 little oxen made a smart left turn, and we went through the gate. The people were still clapping and yelling. Some even followed us along, asking questions about Bob and Bib as we'd walked him back to their shed. Somehow, Bess Tanner was not about in the crowd. I figured she probably was taking another rest. I'd given her up for gone when I looked up, and here she was coming on a dead run. I could just see the top of her head and her big floppy hat with all the flowers on it that weren't real. Between her and us, there was a passel of people, and they just seemed to melt out of the way for Mrs. Tanner. She was so short of breath when she got to us, she couldn't talk. She needed a rest for sure. I kind of hoped that maybe she'd finally spotted a pervert and was just itching to tell folks. "Quick," she said to me between her wheezes. "The 4-H club men are judging the stock that the children raised up." "Hogs?" said Mr. Tanner. "No, they're looking at calves right now, but the hogs are next. I'll pen up the oxen. You take Rob with you, because I can't run another step in these shoes." "Let's get Pinky," said Mr. Tanner, and we were off. Over in the next shed, most of the stock was gone. Pinky was almost the only pig there. We threw the bars open on her pen, and were just about to drive her out. That's when I noticed that she'd been rolling in something that wasn't very clean. On her left shoulder and flank, she had a big dung stain. The rest of her was so clean, thanks to Mr. Tanner's stockman, that the dirty spots stuck out like a mean tongue. I went down on my knees and attacked the dirt with my hands and fingernails. It not only looked bad, but it stunk worse. The strong smell of its freshness made my eyes sting. "Boy," said Ben Tanner, "that ain't no way to wash a pig. What'll wash her? Same thing as washes a dirty pig and a dirty boy. Soap and water. Find soap, I'll fill a bucket, and we're in business." I must have turned Rutland upside down just trying to find some soap. I finally saw a bar of saddle soap in a tack room and made for it, but a man saw me and said, "Hey." "Soap," I said. "I'll buy your soap. My pig's dirty and the 4-H people are judging and we'll miss out. Here, all I got is 10 cents. It's in this hanky and you can have it all." I put the hanky, with Aunt Carrie's dime inside it, into his hand, grabbed the soap, and ran out the door. The man just couldn't say a word. There went my ride on the merry-go-round, into a bar of soap. But I was too rushed to care. Mr. Tanner had a rag, and in no time I got Pinky as clean as Christmas. Most of the water I managed to put on myself, and I was soaked through. And there was so much stink still on my hands, in spite of all the soap and water, that I figured I never would be able to eat a noon meal. Mr. Tanner said that I took so long putting a scrub to Pinky that we'd never get there in time. But we did. The kids were walking around an open ring, and each one had a pig. One boy had a real good-to-look-at Poland china, as white as Pinky but not as big. A girl who was taller than I was had a spotted Poland, and a boy with red hair and lots of freckles had a fine-looking Hampshire. It was coal black with a white belt around it at the shoulder. Had it been a calf, it could have been a sister to Bob and Bib. Some of the pigs were acting up a bit, not staying in line and squealing all the time they was handled by the 4-H judges. The circle was just about whole when we got there, and Mr. Tanner almost threw me and Pinky into it, just as another man closed up the gate. My face was wet with the sweat of hurry. It feels worse, Papa always said, than the sweat of work. I didn't have a hanky to use, so as I stood there, I put my hand up to my brow. And right then I got such a whiff of pig manure I thought I'd pass out. Everything I ever ate went sour and wanted to come up my gullet. The judges were coming my way, but it just didn't matter. All the noise of Rutland Fair and all the music and dust of the place just seemed to float off in a big whirly dream. I didn't need no ride on a merry-go-round, as all of Rutland was spinning about my head and taking me with it. One of my eyes was closed shut, but the one that was part open got a quick look-see at a judge putting something on Pinky, something blue. But when my entire world was green, I couldn't have cared. I just couldn't have cared if they'd put a pig sticker into both of us. The judge said something to me, and that's when I did it. I just leaned my head over, pointing my face at all the little square chips of sawdust, and threw up. Some of it even went on his shoe. The merry-go-round went a whole lot faster, and I'd have fall off for certain, but some big strong hands reached out and caught me, or over I'd have gone. "He's my charge," I heard Mr. Tanner say. "I'll take him." Next thing I knew, we were all back at Pinky's pen. I was lying in fresh straw just outside it. Pinky was inside. Mr. Tanner was standing close by, and Mrs. Tanner was washing my face with a clean towel. "How could you let him get so dirty?" was all she seemed to say to her husband. Mr. Tanner bent down and put his hand under my chin. "Rob, how do you feel?" "Hungry," I said. "Look," he said, pointing at Pinky's neck. "Just look here." It was a blue ribbon, and on it, in gold letters, it said, "First prize for best behaved pig." "It's just about noon," he said. "Let's all put on the feed bag. What say, Bessie?" Bess Tanner just sighed. "Start without me. I don't want to put anything on right now. I just want to take off this cussed corset."